And then they got some telemarketing. I think, just got set this down.
Trying to decide about it.
Try to get started here in a second. Not Mike. Just got, yeah. You on here? I've been censored already. Good afternoon, good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone. Whoa, welcome everyone. That was a wake up. I'm Craig Spiesel, Executive Director of the Online Trust Alliance, and I've got the pleasure here today to moderate a pretty exciting panel. We actually, in the hallway, we're having a great dialogue. We had half the panel discussion already. It's entitled Big Data, Privacy and Security, and How Will These Impact Commercial Exploitation of Big Data? I kind of joked with Chris and others, exploitation always sets a little tone. Are we exploiting data, and what does that mean to consumers? And I want to tie on a few things that we heard this morning. The previous speaker talked about big data and how it's insane what's happening. And I think in a sense that does reflect some of the challenges. Every business, every VC, every startup is saying they have to have a big data strategy, not necessarily sure what they're going to do with it long term. And it reminds me of reading history and what the coal did to the Industrial Revolution. It fueled the growth of the economy and everything. But then over time, we recognized the downside of coal, the pollution, the acid rain and things, and really how things had to change. And I kind of just set that as a backdrop to be thinking about what we're doing with big data and what the long-term implications. Kevin and I talk a lot about not compliance, but about stewardship. What's the right thing to do? But this panel here is we really want to talk about some of the practical things that are happening today. And I want to kind of, from my left here, want to introduce our panel. James Denvo, he's with Hogan Lovells in DC. Rick Doughton from DMI, and he's a CISO here, so he's a guy who actually lives and breathes security, and I guess stays up at night worrying about those things.
Not if I do it right.
Yeah. But the good news is we have Stephanie. Stephanie Sharon is a partner at MoFo, and she keeps people like Rick out of jail, I guess, so to speak.
That's the one to worry about. Yeah.
Yeah, is that it? So, and then last but not least is Lamar, and Lamar is filling in from Andy, who is not able to make it, and I'll kind of give you the pleasure of reading his bio or try to paraphrase since it's not in the handouts. And he is a senior business leader at several innovative tech companies that have developed embedded software, software as service solutions and such. He's been working on 6 years on data gathering, analysis applications at Xerox PARC and others, and 2 startups funded by Paul Allen, and he'll share a little bit as we go of an application they have that I'm still scratching my head on, so I guess I'm not the target audience. So, you know, I'm going to start here a little bit. As we think about the Internet of Things, there's a lot of elements that we think of. We think of the cars, we think of wearables, we think of the home, and it could be anything here. And we really want to talk about, you know, from our panel's perspectives, some of the experience and what are some of the trade-offs and mistakes and perhaps unintended consequences that we've experienced firsthand. And I guess maybe start with yourself here in the automotive in the segment or other segments. Share some of your perspectives in those areas.
Well, one of the things I noticed, especially from this morning's conversation, is you heard that there are these really 2 different ways of looking at big data and the Internet of Things. You've got this wonderful story about the benefits and the things that it can drive, and especially if you look at connected cars, and you can see all the benefits that could come. It could tell you when your brakes are about to die, when your air conditioning is about to die, if you're driving around DC like I do a lot. And if I knew 2 weeks ahead of time that my Honda was about to lose its AC, that would have been wonderful. It's an old Honda, so it wasn't any problem. So there are those types of issues which are great, and the benefits that could be delivered are amazing. And then you've got these other stories that are out there about all the perils of big data, the discriminatory impact that it could have. You even hear people talking about connected cars, especially as data monsters, or being able to know everything that you do. Sometimes it's automotive executives who are saying that in public forums, which doesn't necessarily help. I think the one thing that we can take from that and from some other industries is that privacy shouldn't just be an internal compliance function. It's a social issue. You need to socialize what's going on. You may internally think you've got everything locked down, you're ready to go, you've anonymized data properly, you think that you've got the best privacy protective service ever, and then you go to launch and you could get killed with public opinion, and it can never manifest itself in Bloom, although it's not a connected device system. They're a really good case study. If you look, this company trying to launch a way to monitor student data and to really help teachers deliver needed services to students and to help school districts. If you look at their story, it seemed like they had everything locked down, looked at the Family Education Rights Privacy Act. They thought that they were in good shape. Come to launch, they could never get ahead of the negative image that they were going to be monetizing student data. No matter what they said, they couldn't get ahead of it. So I think it's a good message for developers and for companies when you're getting ready to launch. Do some studies to figure out how is the public going to view your product, your service, your technology, and don't just rely on your internal eyes.
Well, great. I want to actually, you talk about benefit. I want to tie, everyone in their packet got this handout from the research that Trustee did, and there's been some similar research by Pew and our own organization. I'm just trying to quote here, 22% of the respondents thought the benefits of smart devices outweighed the privacy concerns. What that means is 78% don't think that. So, we talk about benefits. Rick, from your perspective, you're seeing that, so we talk about how do we articulate those benefits? And then again, the lessons learned from both, not only the privacy side, but how are we securing that data?
Right. I'm sure that if you pivot that data a little bit more, that 20% were all millennials. It's like, yeah, well, whatever. Because I find that in my corporation, just doing, bring your own device policies. There are a wave of people who are very, very paranoid about it, and people are like, yeah, whatever, put anything on my device. I don't really care. I'm fine. And ironically, that's very generational based. I worry about the protection of the data where it stands. So even notwithstanding the notification I've given you and I got consent and all the things you said that I make sure everything is okay with it, I spent whoops, I won't touch that. I spent half of my career breaking into networks and the other half defending networks. And so I understand how easy it is and how hard it is for organizations who don't have the staff or the knowledge or the money, not to mention the people to be able to protect it appropriately. And they're passing it on to cloud providers all over the world, which has other privacy considerations depending on the type of data and what country it might be in. So there's so many different moving parts to it, and there's so many different aspects I need to worry about. And one of the things that kind of struck me listening this morning was that it reminded me, I'm from the DC area, I work a lot with the DoD and the intelligence community, and big data is really what the intelligence community has been doing in their entire lives as far as intel analysis. And the fidelity of the data, the quality of the source, and the confidence of the information, and the timeliness of that data are all very big elements that provide, the accuracy to it. And so we're making critical decisions based on this data that we may not have, really, defined. Do I trust the source? Is it timely? Is it accurate? Is it all these kinds of things, or give some kind of analysis of that aspect to it? And so I worry about that if we're going to be putting a lot of trust into the decisions we make from that.
Well, great. Actually, you mentioned DC, and for those of you who may have read, there's a recent report that came out in May from the White House on big data, and it was entitled Seizing Opportunities but Preserving Values. And I thought it was an interesting title because that's one of the challenges that we're in. But you mentioned cloud services providers, and I wanted to kind of get your thoughts a little bit. A lot of startups being very innovative, but they're relying on other parties to either develop part of their services, have storage, perhaps some of your experiences of some of the missteps or maybe best practices in those areas.
Sure. So, I don't know, is this on? My background's a little bit different from some on the panel in that I am a technology transactions lawyer by training who has a focus on the intersection of data privacy and technology, and I've spent my entire career practicing in the Valley. So we're here in Silicon Valley. Many of my clients are emerging companies, others are more mature companies, and the way that those two sets come at these issues is dramatically different based on the resources that they have and what they're at a practical level capable of doing. So heard a little bit about some of the risks and challenges and perceptions, and I always like to start out with my startup companies and really emphasizing this issue of consumer trust. The site or the service, the school service that James was talking about, actually really that experience came home very closely to one of my clients without revealing any confidences that was in a similar, not identical business, but similar business. They were trying to do the right thing, but we looked very carefully at how that was playing out in the press, and it did impact the way that we presented the company online to its users. And I mean, this is very much a marketing exercise as much as anything else. So while we can get caught up in the details of regulatory compliance, at the end of the day, this is all about trying to preserve and build a business. And with smaller companies, you have to be practical and you have to find ways, sometimes creative ways, to get to the point where you can be a GE and look at all of those issues and the complexity and cut through it. But you know, kind of coming back to this issue of how do you deal with your commercial vendors and what are some of the key issues, I think number one, allocating risk with your commercial vendors who are providing services to you, whether it's in providing components of a Internet of Things landscape, or it's in providing a platform for big data analysis or storage of your data as part of a platform of services. Figuring out who's responsible for what and who actually is in the best position to control the risk, I think is critical. And then finding ways to objectively define what the vendor's responsibility is and what the customer's responsibility is. If you just say, I want you to be responsible for all of the data security breaches that are out there and indemnify me on an unlimited basis, just hit a brick wall. You'll never get to commercialization. But if you find a way to define what a reasonable approach to data security is for your application, for the type of data that you're storing, for the country in which you're storing it, and then you say, now I want you to say what you're going to do and do what you're going to say. Just like what we say about privacy policies, say what you're going to do and do what you're going to say and update it periodically over time because things change. So I think that would be my...
So just out of curiosity, how many of you are with a startup right now? Actually, a good percentage. Well, that's a perfect lead-in to our next, to Lamar, and you know, he's sharing this new mobile app that records the last 3 minutes of your life, and kind of like a black box in there. And so, you know, as you're thinking about the data and you're looking at developing those new products, what are the implications you're thinking about? I mean, looking in the future, you know, on the plus side, or how is it going to be used, or how is it going to be abused?
Yeah, it's we are on the interesting side of this technology and this issue. We are all about collecting user data and analyzing that data, I mean, to our deepest core. And so we have, we like to say we swim in both ends of the pool. We have applications in the marketplace. We have one that's a life logging application, one of the most popular in the world, called Saga, that, you know, you opt in, you say, we understand we're going to follow your entire life and build this story, you know, in an ambient way for you. And so now the issue has to come, you know, how are we protecting that data from those users? How much value are we going to give back to that user in return for them allowing us to do that level? At least from a standpoint of privacy, we say we will guarantee you, if you want to leave our service and you want us to delete your data, we'll do that. So we make that, we went through trustee certification, you know, we say we comply that. The security side of it is, if you hack those data centers, you hack them. I mean, so we have those issues, and you know, we try to do whatever we can to protect against that. You know, we're part of Paul Allen's empire, and he loves to play around with applications. So we have this other application called that you're talking about that will allow you to record the last 15 seconds of anything you hear, and post that out to your social network. And this is just something he just wants to play with in a whimsical way. So what happens with that? I mean, it could be very fun, and there are lots of social apps like this in the marketplace today. I mean, not even just apps, but devices. Google Glass, could record that. So we're not alone in that. But what happens to that when someone decides to do something a little devious? I caught you doing something pretty rude at a party when you were drinking too much, and I post that out on a social network somewhere. Whose responsibility is that? We'd really like to say that's not ours. We're trying to do something that's fun, but have we enabled it? You talked about this. Who ends up being the responsible party when you enable an underlying technology standpoint? We also, the other end of the pool that we play in, we're beginning now to license out this technology on a commercial basis, and we just did our first commercial deal with one of the largest smartphone providers. This will enable them to now go in and do activity analysis around all those users, and all that data is getting logged into a data center somewhere, and they cross borders. So now, what is the issue with us in this case? We know what our policies are, and we know what we would say to the users. We know what we would do with that data according to the countries that we're operating in. But now we're having to rely on some other company to be able to put their own data and privacy and security policies in place. Now, who's the responsible party if that's breached somehow? And so we sort of live in that world. We think about it on a daily basis, but the issues are complicated.
Well, clearly, as we look at devices like that, I mean, from a policy perspective, I think from one end, wiretap, and I think of who is the user. You're collecting data on tons of policy issues. But, and as we're tethered to mobile devices, that effectively, our phones are almost a wearable technology today in a rude sense there. But Rick, I know you've been doing some stuff on wearable technologies, and as you look at this data, how is it being stored? How is it being transferred? Are we really thinking through those things holistically?
Right, because my company builds a lot of mobile apps for things around the world. Like the Heathrow app is one notable one, and one of the things about that is they're constantly being the data from that is constantly being pooled by other apps because it is the authoritative source of all of the flight information from Heathrow Airport. And so other apps are trying to pool that. Now let's pivot that onto other apps we make that are user loyalty apps for other things around the world, whether grocery stores or other types of stuff. And again, you have other folks trying to get at that data that needs to be protected because they want to use it for their own purposes. When we talk about wearables, one of the things that I also start worrying about is that our phones then become that sensor. So I have a Fitbit, or I have a heart rate monitor, or I have all these different things that are now sending healthcare data about my my health to this phone. Is the phone protected? Is the app okay? Are other apps able to access it on devices that allow that to happen? And is that data that gets pushed out to the cloud stored and protected in a way that's notable? Because there might be people who, again, may want access to that data that may be able to find that there are APIs open to people who are supposed to have it, but not open to those who shouldn't have it. And so we have a lot of, all comes back to the complexity. And I think we've kind of opened this Pandora's box of, data in the cloud. Where is it on the planet? One of the big challenges, I used to be on the board for the Open Data Center Alliance, is, how do I get my data back? And we talk about the deleting of data that you want to. It's like, all right, well, do you know where it is? Because it's distributed across the world in different data centers. How do I know I got it all? That then wasn't backed up and stored on some other center somewhere else in a mountain. So it becomes these complicated things. So basically, looking at the data that we're getting from personal wearable devices, where it is on the phone, where it is backed up to, and making sure it's protected along that whole command path, even locally being able to sniff it as it goes across from your device to your phone.
Clearly a lot of policy implications. And again, I've heard other people, it's like, your personal data, once it's out there, like in Facebook, when they made the policy change, and once you put a photo up there, it's effectively the public domain. And certainly when you talk about, Lamar, the data up there, you're asked 15 seconds, it's being posted on site. How do you get it back? And I think those are challenges that we're looking at. And does anyone want to follow up on any of this?
Well, I was only going to say that, we really, I hope this doesn't sound naive, but we want to come at the way we look at this issue of wearables and data as, how much value can we return? So not only in this light logging app that I'm talking about, Saga, are we doing ambient recording of your location and ascribing place to it, but we connect with Jawbone and Fitbit and Runkeeper and MyFitnessPal and, another list of 10 or 12 others. And really what we want to do is to look at all this data and see how does it all mesh together? What is, what could I gather from that? I know I can gather steps from this Jawbone here, but if I have my diet app in there as well, I have my heart monitor, nobody's really taking that and aggregating across that and adding some value back to me. Our data scientists are in the background trying to say, how are we going to add that extra value to somebody that puts all those things together and gives you the, maybe the analysis that you're about to have trouble before you even do, or I know I'm really trying to lose weight, but the app saw me at McDonald's 3 times last week. What sort of notification might I send, back to the user to help them along with their goals? And so, we come at it from that standpoint, that we think the value is hopefully better than the issue of privacy, because this whole thing of privacy is really out anyway. I mean, any of us carrying a phone or, walking around on the streets and being captured by all the closed circuit TV. I mean, there's not.
It's a challenge. And clearly, you think about big data, you think about data brokers, and now you think about insurance companies have access to that information from your Fit and your wearable device, and they also have your card from the grocery store, and they see you're eating all this red meat and cigarettes and perhaps over-the-counter medicines. And so clearly there's areas of abuse. On the other hand, on one hand, consumers are getting value because they're getting discounts and such. Want to kind of shift from wearable to the home and smart grid and some areas in that area, because the connected home, and again, I'm constantly seeing ads, you can reset your alarm, you can reset your thermostat. But I think James, you have some experience in that area there you can share.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that you see with some of the, especially as we get more and more devices connected, with connected cars connecting to the connected home and the connected thermostat in your office, your phone, part of it is there are security issues there, which we can speak to a lot more. But as it gets more complex, security is going to get even harder. And it's not just about identity theft anymore. You're talking about the kinetic impacts that you could have from unauthorized access. So you hear a lot about these scare stories about people hacking cars, and there have been no live hackings of cars on the road yet, but at least that story's out there. So companies need to have an answer for that, both technologically and in terms of their public statements. But the other big thing with all these connected devices and just the connected world is, and Paul was talking about it earlier, is all these data protection frameworks that we have and the proliferation of them. And many people are probably familiar with, in Europe, you generally can't transfer data outside of the European Economic Area unless you're transferring it to a country that is deemed to have adequate data protection. US doesn't have it. Very few countries have it. I think the number's 13 now that are deemed to have adequate data protection. And as more and more companies are building these connected devices and connected services, whether it be wearables, whether it be in your home and you're taking your phone with you when you go to Europe, and then you want your information to come back to your home to know what you might want when you get home. There are lots of issues there. They're navigable, but they're complex. And I think companies really need to understand early on the degree to which their technologies, their services, their products are going to impact various data protection frameworks. Russia just passed a law where you're going to have to store data collected from Russian citizens in Russia.
That's to protect their citizens.
Yeah,
right?
to protect their citizens. Whether it's to protect security, whether it's to get more access to the data, or whether it's to incentivize local investments. Brazil recently rejected a data localization requirement, but some people thought it was really just to get big tech companies to invest data centers in Brazil. But even though Brazil got rid of that requirement, their long-arm jurisdiction is still there, where if you're an internet company collecting data from Brazilian citizens, Brazilian law impacts you. And Europe recently ruled the same with Google, as most people are aware. So there's lots of things to consider as you're building these things. You may feel like you're a little startup, or you're just this company that's just now getting into issues and just saying, oh, I'm building connected cars. Why do I need to worry about international data transfers, well, you never know when all of a sudden you're going to be impacted by whether it's long-arm jurisdiction, data transfer issues. So you've got to pay attention to those and build awareness of that within your company.
I think it's really clear, and I want to follow up in a second with you here. But what we're seeing is balkanization under the concept of privacy. And is it, for a lot of the reasons you suggest, is it about building cloud services in a different country and different things? But as we talk about whose job is it within a company, and you talk about compliance, and obviously that's one of the first reasons they reach out to a law firm, unfortunately. But whose job is it within a company? Is it the chief privacy officer? Is it the CISO?
So I mean, in my experience, actually, these issues are very much come down to business issues as opposed to just compliance issues. I think that the compliance officers are often consulted after the fact, often far beyond when they could have meaningful input. And we heard a little bit about how that role might evolve over time. But I'm not so confident that it will, in part because I think that these issues cut to the very core of what the strategic business objectives and revenue goals of a company are. And if you put compliance, particularly the word big C, compliance first, that is like, I mean, talk about a good way to deflate a room. I mean, nobody wants to hear about the balkanization of regulatory. I'm sorry, they don't. They want an answer. They want to know, how do I get from here to there? There's got to be a way. Don't put a bunch of roadblocks in front of me. So I think that the answer lies in some middle ground. And I think one of the things we can look at, and I would draw your attention to, there were a few slides that we circulated in the handout, and one of those slides that I put in there talks about the life cycle of a thing, which is basically looking at the Internet of Things, and then the data. Just think about data being spit out as these things are put into operation. And at each stage of this life cycle that's on the chart, you have the company and different vendors plugging in. And so from a legal standpoint or a business standpoint, you need to look at each stage and say, what's the appropriate level of thought that needs to go into privacy, security, and all of the other issues that go into putting a product and service into operation. It's not, privacy and security are just two issues. There are many, many others. They need to be on the list. And when we talk about privacy by design and security by design, all we're saying is put that thought in that first box in design and development. Get people thinking about how they want this product to work then, because if you don't start thinking about it until you get to the installation or operation box, it's too late. It's just too late. The other thing I would say is that I really like the point James made about the evolving security threats. There's a slide in here about the security threats in the Internet of Things, and then in addition, a slide from a paper that I think came out of the University of Washington and maybe USD as well. Kono's very well-established professor, or interesting professor who's done a lot of work on connected cars and did you probably heard about this study about remotely disabling brakes in cars and demonstrating that it's possible. He was at the workshop in DC last year. He published a paper where they looked at the low-level mechanisms for actually breaching security and what the goals, intermediate and high level, might be of a bad actor, malicious actor who's trying to do harm. I think this is a really good way to start to frame, at a business level, layperson's level, why do I care? Because it's probably, while there may be threats from a marketing and advertising and commercial perspective to users' privacy, the really dangerous stuff, I think, is in ransomware and the bad actors who can hack into these systems and do truly malicious things.
Right. So Rick, let me kind of bring back, product development, and my past employer, unnamed in Redmond, I remember, security and privacy, we did that in the final review, and then moving into now, you go into meetings, and before even a functional spec is really written, per se, the whiteboard, and it's like, what are the security and privacy? And so maybe from your perspective, Rick, seeing that evolve in actual products, and perhaps either the examples of where someone failed to do that, and perhaps the code had to be scuttled, or a million lines had to be rewritten, or any.
Oh yeah, no, I've spent a lot of my career testing things, and that was always the case. Is online banking applications in the late 90s, right before it's supposed to go live, we would test it to make sure if we can move money from one account to the other or do something we shouldn't, and we always could. And then they have to go back and re-engineer it to kind of fix it. It becomes very expensive, and so they just learned pragmatically that it's cheaper to fix flaws earlier in design. And so I really like, Stephanie, your kind of supply chain there, because I was thinking a lot about, this is really risk management. I, as a CISO, am a risk management person, and I work with the CEO to identify what are the things that could impact our business. And it might be a supply chain. And if I'm, let's say, automotive, and I'm building the seats in the car, I have a cowl, because the lead's going to turn to leather, they'll become a seat, and an ore that becomes the metal becomes the frame of the seat, and there's a whole supply chain that gets it from a cowl and ore to a seat that gets plugged in at the right time when that car comes off the assembly line. And it's a very delicate balance in that particular case in the timing, but it's the same thing when we come into development of any kind of system. You need to understand what the security, privacy, and impact of those are throughout each of the phases, like you're saying. And then what is the likelihood? And then who are the actors? Because we really can't, and what I spent in the defense industrial base against advanced persistent threat and nation state attackers, we really had to kind of look at the who part of it. What is these adversaries' capability? What is their intent? And what is their opportunity? And so, and through each of these different areas, it's like, all right, who would want to do this? Why would they want to do this? And how smart are they? The people who would actually do this, and how would they benefit? And so, kind of bringing that element into it, because that's reality. So I'm not being hacked by some random computer on the other side of the world. I'm being hacked by a person. And the more that I understand these things about who that person is, the more that I can be able to help better protect. And so that's where, certainly being able to understand the likelihood of these things, and it's more likely that in an online banking application that I move money from one to another than the fact that I'm going to try to take something down, because that's not really a benefit to the threat actor.
I just wanted to add, since I'm on the business side of doing commercial transactions for us, I'm recognizing the importance of putting this compliance person, up front in the company, because we've had a couple of situations we can't find that person. Mm-hmm. We're getting ready to go operational, and we just can't even find who that is. And
I've noticed in some transactions, it's really easy for compliance to be the no person if they're involved at the 11th hour. But if you can get them involved, and if you can get compliance, privacy, and security involved in the beginning to figure out, okay, this is our goal, how do we get there? They can help you do it. And there are times when clients come and they say, okay, can you just sign off on this contract? And it's like, wait, there's health information here, and you're sharing it. There's this thing called HIPAA that you haven't even worried about yet. Or somebody comes, a developer comes and says, oh, we just made a little tweak. Now we're collecting location information. That's the only change.
And the 13-year-olds too.
Yeah, the 13-year-olds. Just location information from 10-year-olds. That's fine. Yeah. Wait, you've got to stop. But if there's early on, if people are saying, this is what we want to do, navigating CABA, navigating HIPAA, you can do that easily. But if you're already about to sign a contract with your vendors, with the people with whom you're going to share information, and you're just looking for sign-off from compliance at the end, you make it a really horrible answer. But if they're sitting with you throughout the whole period, things are likely going to work.
So let me, when we talk about security and big data and privacy, and I think we had a hallway conversation earlier, but can security and privacy be part of a product's value proposition?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. You get a discriminator. It's like, if I have trust in a product, I have trust in a company, I'm more likely to use it. And then I can, and being able to kind of have that. I think one of the things I want to kind of add on what he said very briefly is, I keep falling back on risk management, which is prioritizing that things that could impact your business the most. And these are all things that are going to impact your business. And so, as a management consultant back before I became Defender, a CISO, if I don't have to teach you anything about security, if I can help you make better decisions that are risk-based, that are prioritized, that's like, yes, compliance is something, but that's a checkbox. If I align my security of the supply chain that we're talking about to meet the requirements that I want to best protect my business, then compliance becomes a reporting exercise. Because what I'm going to think of is a lot more than someone in 2005 in a room knows nothing about my business came up with.
Yeah, I love that point, because I mean, when I talk to the the technical guys and the folks in charge of security at most of our clients, they sort of laugh at us. You know, it's like, you're worried about that. Like, let me tell you what you really should be worried about. And it's really true. I mean, you know, these folks get so far beyond it. The problem is you need to marry the two, and there needs to be somebody there who can marry the sort of the technical implementation with what is required so that you're prepared as you roll these products out. And also in the contract negotiations, the vendor negotiations, really, you know, thinking through how is the liability for this product different, perhaps, than what we've done before, others have done before, and, you know, how do we need to approach liability and risk allocation here that may need to be tweaked, because what we're doing really is fundamentally giving rise to new threats, new potential risks that didn't exist before the technology existed.
So, you know,
that's what's really interesting.
My question about making it part of a value proposition was not rhetorical. A lot of companies want to do that, but the problem is, if I say we do this, and what happens if something changes? What happens if I say, you know, we are the best or most secure, or, you know, security is really part? So the concern of, you know, the business model changes, and so companies are actually very reluctant to do that. I was just on a conversation with a very large retailer who believes that their security and privacy practices are a competitive differentiator, and they went through an audit and looking at, but they don't want to come out and say that because they're afraid what happens if they miss something. And so that gets into the legal side, you know, coming in and say, you don't want to make that assertion out there. But at the same time, they want to kind of, you know, promote that. And so, Lamar, I mean, have you kind of go through any of those? Or?
When we launched Saga, as I said, this is a life logging app. And we were worried when we were getting ready to launch that the press would kill us on this whole privacy issue. And it was part of our motivation to say up front and go through the trustee certification that when we tell you, if you want us to not only, you know, you want to stop our app, but you want us to delete your data, that we went through the certification to show we can do that, and we can prove that we'll do that for your data. So we thought that was part of our value.
Great. We only have a few minutes left here. Of course, we did start a little late here. Room for a few questions from the audience, and then we do have one wrap-up lightning round that we want to go through here. Don't be shy. See a hand in the back there.
Yeah, I'll shout it out. The question is, you mentioned the laws in the different countries and so on. How enforceable are those? I mean, keeping your data in a country, is that realistic that that's going to be enforceable?
So, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think everyone have a different view. I mean, wasn't that long ago some people were being jailed by, I can't remember, in Europe from Google. And so, you know, so whether they can bring suit there in the U.S., I mean, there's a lot of issues coming forward. And I think the point that I recommend is, you know, the U.S. may be the floor in a lot of the regulations and the minimum amount, and some of you may disagree with that. But, you know, and by state, I mean, even on a state-by-state basis, you know, Canada now, you have to reaffirm that there's someone opt into your mail list, you know, and so now that's going through there. Australia just introduced some new rules. So you need to look across all of that, because if you have a nexus or you have anyone over there, I think you can be held accountable, and we're seeing that.
One thing I would just very briefly is that a lot of people focus on Europe because you know, it's in the press all the time. But the reality is, while Europe is a concern, the fines and sanctions and penalties, with a few countries accepted, Italy being one with that Google example, tend to be relatively modest. But go to Asia. One of my associates was telling me that his friend's dad was just thrown in jail because of this sale of consumer data, which is a rampant problem there. And there are several countries where, I mean, truly, if you were to, anyone from the company were to travel subsequent to this, they could end up in very, very serious trouble. So you got to know what you're doing, you know. You don't want to.
I mean, it's a risk management issue, I think. I mean, if you are storing the data in a particular country, then you're going to perhaps run into some issues. So if you're storing data with a cloud provider, you should probably understand where they're storing the data. If you've got establishments or personnel in a country, then there's more risk. If you're a small startup here that doesn't have many establishments overseas, I think there are certainly considerations where you can go, maybe I don't have to worry about that finished law quite as much as I should if we start putting data servers or personnel there.
I'd add that is as more countries are getting very specific on opt-in and you need to make sure you have a system in place to reaffirm where does someone reside, at least in country. So right now, I mean, companies are having to send a list to everyone on their list because they don't know if they're a Canadian resident. And I've seen some really horrific applications. If you don't apply, we're going to opt you out automatically. It's like, my God, you're going to kill your entire mail list. But you need to know that. And so there are some best practices. I'm not sure, is Ray here in the room here? Yeah. So Ray has a great background in email and such with Trustee, but there are ways. Update your profiles. Get someone so you know where they are in the first place so you better understand some of those issues there. One more question from the audience at all?
I do. I work for Citrix. We deal with a lot of innovative products. So I really related to what you were talking about compliance coming in at the end, because we're talking about small tiger teams, 4 or 5 developers putting together a mobile app. We're saying we're going to throw it out there. We're not going to charge anything for it. They're linking up to third parties to use to support that innovation. And then it's like, oh, yeah, legal, right? And so I feel like I'm always putting the brakes on them. And so that's the challenge, right? You've got innovation, which is what the business wants to do and drive it forward, but we've also got to look at the risk. So from my perspective, it is all about balancing those. And if you've got something that's experimental, you're not charging anything, you're not targeting children, it's only in the US.
Right.
But still it's challenging. So how, a lot of these little third-party providers, they won't negotiate with you. You have to accept, right?
Right.
So what do you do when you're in that situation?
So, I mean, first of all, I think you need to have a seat at the table, and you got to have it early on. So if you have a business unit in a bigger company like a Citrix that's in innovation, being invited to the meetings is the first, that's the first battle, is actually knowing what's happening so that you can start to think through in your head, how am I gonna manage this process? And some of that is gaining the business's trust, frankly. If you're always the one saying no, you're not going to get invited to the meetings. If you actually are coming up with solutions that get them through it, and you're able to make some of those harder calls where you say, this isn't great, but in this case, I think we just need to go for it, then you're gonna have more success and more credibility down the road. So it sounds like you're thinking through things in the right way, but it's a process. And then coming up with, within the legal or compliance department, what your red flags are, whether it's, type of data, hot button countries, data transfer, but you need to have that readily available, that checklist in your head.
I mean, mobile clearly, and mobile and big data, it's a wild west. I mean, I personally think that some of the platforms, the malls, the plays, the app stores have some responsibility of vetting those too, because I think unfortunately they're up there, they're free, we're at this yes, 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 you click it and download. So even if the app developer's trying to do the right thing, is it secure and the data secure there? So we need to wrap up. What I like to do is kind of, get each one of you to kind of give a quick 30, 60-second quick recap. Where are we going to be a year from now, and where are we going to be 5 years from now? What are the issues? What are the learnings? And will consumers be in a better place or a worse place?
I think overall consumers will probably be in a better place. I mean, I think 5 or 6 years ago, we look back and we get Android, we get Twitter, we get app stores. So just in that limited amount of time, these huge things have happened. More huge things are going to happen probably even in the next year. Legally, I would look in the next year, especially what's going to happen with the European data protection regulation, where that's going, especially now that we've got this lesson from the Google case from the European Court of Justice. We'll see what impact that has. I also think in the next year, next 5 years, I look to see what happens, especially with just domestic laws, as we realize all the big roadblocks they put up, like the Video Privacy Protection Act, where you had to obtain written consent to share your videotapes because somebody posted in a newspaper what Supreme Court Justice nominee Bork had rented at a video store. So we had this great Privacy Act. And then all of a sudden people wanted to share the videos that they watched with their friends on Facebook. So we needed an amendment to that. And I think you're going to see more and more laws that need amendments to deal with big data and the Internet of Things, e-sign being one of them. Everyone thinks e-sign does the best thing at making electronic transactions. Look at the consumer disclosure laws in e-sign and you'll realize they're a nightmare for big data in the Internet.
Great, Rick?
Well, I'm not as optimistic, but again, I'm a security guy. My job is to be paranoid and worry about things. And so, I would say, I will just to follow up on what you were saying about Citrix is like educating and empowering them. Years ago, in web applications, talking to the developers and teaching them, and they are smarter than I am, so they come up with better ways of doing things that I would have come up with. But it's empowering them to want to do this and make them want to do it. And I think that the same applies at a macro level to the society as well. It was like, okay, well, there's some research in Europe about error messages, and error messages aren't effective as compared to phishing emails because they're luring you because like, ooh, here's a benefit of something, I want to click that, and I'll get infected. But error messages are like, don't go here, it's bad, just trust me. No, I need some more information. And so I think that if we do a better job of kind of educating why this is good for you, it's like not just here's what collecting, here's why collecting it, here's what we're going to use for it, here's what we're not going to use for it, you okay with that? But kind of making it more marketing speak of like, here's why collecting, here's what the benefits of collecting it for you are, here are the potential, potential side effects that may happen, but what the likelihood of these side effects happening to you, and then you can make a more informed decision. And so I think that over and above, I mean, yes, totally agree with everything you said, what our laws are going to be, what European law is going to evolve to, what, when they start to splinter more and it becomes even more complicated for a CISO has to worry about, 50 different countries and where my employees are and what I can do and what I can monitor and what I can block. We might get a little easier when we start to smooth it out because it gets too complex to manage.
Stephanie, we're getting the flag here,
Yeah.
so we're going to be.
Yeah. So I would just say that I think we're going to learn a lot over the next few years, but I think there's going to be kind of two trends. One is you're going to continue to see investors in the Valley invest in companies to disrupt, and disruption's a big deal right now. I think we're going to continue to see that in the Internet of Things and big data, and they're going to continue to plow ahead, try to find a path through. At the same time, I think that there's going to be new types of liabilities and risks as we find that incorrect inferences, incorrect correlations come out of data sets that haven't been fully vetted. And some of those risks will become more apparent, and over time, we'll see both the regulatory environment and kind of the investment community and business community have to become more realistic. Like any new technology or new business that's evolving, there's a maturation process. I think we're going to.
So consumers going to be better off or worse?
I think that consumers are going to be better off in the long run, but maybe worse off in the short run.
Okay, so we've got three different opinions so far here.
I'm optimistic we're going to be better off. I want us to be better off. I personally believe I'm over-notified with annoying information, and ads that come my way don't have a lot of relevance to me. And so I think if we do what a lot of people want to do with big data and really personalize it and contextualize the information, we're going to be better off in 5 years.
Great. Well, I want to thank the panel for their insights and taking the time and flying down here and such. I think there's a break or lunch is outside, and we'll be around for any other one-to-one discussion. So I want to thank everyone for joining us, and also thank again, Trustee, for hosting us.